Hi guys, hope everyone's doing alright. This is James from Divine Crochet. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I thought I'd share with you guys how I make my distressed crochet scarves. It's getting a little bit colder here in the UK, so I've currently made two versions of these. Whilst I'm not a scarf person necessarily, I definitely am an accessories person, and this is a really nice accessory to add to just quite a simple outfit. So this scarf is perfect for you guys that are trying to learn how to freehand distress crochet. I know a lot of you had some troubles with making my mesh distress jumper. So for you guys that struggle with that, this is definitely a good stepping stone project to making that jumper. The scarf will follow kind of a rough pattern, but a lot of it is going to involve kind of your judgment and your freehanding. So in that way, it's a good way to start getting into freehand crochet while still having some structure to follow, rather than just trying to make it work when you're not really sure what you're doing. Like and comment on this video if you found it helpful. I'm going to leave all of my social media links down below as usual. I'm also going to leave my Etsy store below. I've got a lot of new products on there, so please go and check that out. The materials you'll need for this scarf, you want to pick 2 yarns in slightly different sizes or colours. For this scarf, I decided to use white cotton yarn in double knit and in 2-ply, just because I wanted that variance to kind of break up the distressed material. You could also do this by using different colours of yarn or different colours and different weights of yarn. This is definitely up to personal preference. The only other thing you'll need is a pair of scissors, and then we're ready to go. To start our project, we're going to start off with a slip knot, and in my opinion it's going to be easier to start off with your thicker yarn. So for me, I'm going to start off with that double knit yarn, and from here you just want to go ahead and chain the total length of your scarf. In this chain row, we're going to start introducing one of the techniques we'll use to make our scarf look distressed, which is just going to be to pull that chain before we then yarn over, pull that through. So we're not doing anything different from a chain, we're just basically extending it. And I kind of spread these out. I would say I put around 10 to 30 chain stitches in between them, but really I kind of just do them randomly. You just want to repeat this step till you're happy with the total length. For me, I kind of try it on as if it was a scarf to roughly see how long the scarf will be. Obviously, remember this is going to be an estimate. But once you're happy with that total length, what you're going to do is you're going to get your yarn and cut it. And then what we will do is yarn over, pull that through to finish off that chain row. This is going to be where we start off our next row, so I'm going to place that to the right of me. From here on out, what we're going to do to start off our rows is we're going to have a slip knot on our hook. We will then yarn over and insert our hook into any point into the row that we've just done. So either at the start or a few stitches up, depending on kind of how you feel. Starting and ending your rows at different points is going to add a frayed end to your scarf, but if you don't want this, you can just start and end your rows at the same point. And from here, what we're going to be doing is doing a mix of double crochets, chains, and then those long chains that we were doing earlier. And what's important to remember here is you want to factor how long the chains are at the top and how long the chains are at the bottom. This is going to be something that you visually check for. As you can see, I'm kind of doing 1 stitch into each stitch, and where I chain I'll skip 1 or 2. But if we look at our project, it kind of, even though it turns a little bit, it kind of tracks into a straight line. Now in these few stitches, I'm just going to kind of not think about how long the top row is and how long the bottom row is, just so I can show you what not to do. So as you can see here, I'm just kind of doing random stitches into the chain row, not really thinking. And if you look here, the row at the top that I've made is way shorter than that chain row at the bottom, so it kind of buckles and comes together and makes it not look straight. So I'm going to undo all my stitches till that point. And then what I need to do is add more chain stitches in between my stitches. As I said earlier, you can roughly use the gauge of 1 stitch per chain, and then obviously when you're doing those stretched out chain stitches, you want to account for more than 1 chain, kind of like equivalent to how long it would be if you did chain. But for me, as it's a freehand project, I don't do this. I just kind of, as I say, track where that top row is versus the chain row that I'm working into, and making sure that visually they look the same even though they've got stitches in between them. So even though your work might turn, you do want to make sure that the top of the row and your chain row kind of track against each other like 2 parallel lines.
And you want to make sure that there's no bunching of either your chain row or the current row that you're working on. Now, this is going to be the hardest to face when you reach those stretched out chains that you did in your chain row. So what I would do is I would visually look at how long this is, and I can see that this is probably about the same width as 4 double crochets. So I could either chain 4 or 5, or I could even stretch the chain to a similar length. But for me, I'm going to put 4 double crochets into this stretch chain. And this is what I mean by visually looking at your work. I can look at the length of this chain and know once I put 4 double crochets in and stretch it, that is going to be around the same length as the chains that I've just worked into. So once I kind of carry on working up, it's going to track straight. I'm near the end of my first row, and as you can see, it doesn't look perfect by any means, but there's not really any bunching. There's a lot of twisting, but there's no bunching, and that's what we want to look for. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish off my row. And because I don't want all of my rows to start and end at the same point, once I've done my final double crochet, I'm just going to chain a few, and what this is going to do is it's going to allow my next row to start a little bit sooner than where it ended, and this is going to create more of a frayed end. Obviously this is completely optional. Again, to start my next row, I'm going to start my row where I've just finished off. This time I'm going to repeat what I've just done, but in that other yarn size. So for me, I'm going to be using a 2-ply, but for you, you might just be using a different color. Because I've just ended that row of double crochets with some chains, I'm going to start at the start of the chain. If I omit this though, what you could do is you could start a few stitches in. And effectively, even though you're using a different size yarn, you want to keep the same principle. So we'll just be mixing it up randomly, doing double crochets, chain stitches, and those extended chain stitches. I would just check that the change in your yarn size isn't affecting your tension. I naturally have quite tight tension, so I need to consciously keep my grip quite loose, just because when I use a small yarn size and a big hook size, my stitches will shrink anyway just because of my tension. Honestly, I think that might just be a me problem. As I say, I do naturally have really tight tension, so what I would just recommend is you just do exactly the same thing that you did in the row below, where you just kind of visually look at what you're doing and make sure everything is tracking straight. The more rows you add, the easier it is to kind of see where your stitches should go. Also, if you've done everything right, the more rows you add, the less twisted it should become. Obviously it's not really a problem if you don't mind how it looks. At the end of the day, it is a distressed scarf, and realistically there's no wrong thing to do because it's distressed, so there's no pattern. But again, as I've said 1,000 times in this video, it's all up to personal preference. And obviously, just as we did with the row before, we want to visually check that everything is kind of stacking nicely on top of each other. So once you get to the end of this row, you can do your final stitch, yarn over, pull through. I've already cut my yarn, so I didn't need to do that. Personally, I like to keep the length of the ends of each row different, just to add to the distress detail of the scarf. But from here, we're basically just going to continue the same thing that we've been doing. For me, this scarf is going to be mainly comprised of the double knit yarn and just a few rows of the 2-ply yarn. And as I said earlier, I'm varying how I start these rows. So for this row, I'm going to chain a bunch before I then start my first double crochet in the first stitch. And as I mentioned earlier, you can start your stitches a few stitches up from the last stitch, and this is going to add to that frayed end. And then from here out, we're just going to repeat everything that we've done. I could spend so long talking about distress stitches, but I'm going to leave that there because fundamentally I feel like the more you practice it, the more you realise what looks good with your style of crochet. And me teaching you what looks good on my distress stitches might actually not look too great with your kind of crochet. So you definitely want to experiment a little bit. But effectively, you just want to keep on adding rows to your scarf until you're happy with how thick it is, and then you're done.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Obviously, I've done all of these rows with double crochet, but you could do the same principle with single, triple, any kind of stitch that you would like. As you can see in the skinny pink scarf, I use double crochet and single crochet, so that's definitely something you can play around with. Make sure you like, comment and subscribe. I've got all of my links down below for my social media if you are interested. Please let me know any questions you have in the comments below, and if you have any recommendations for things you want me to film in the future, also let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.